Billy Bragg follows the trail of the Okies in Voices from the Dust Bowl.
I left Texas one beautiful day. I made up my mind that I would not stay. No longer in Texas, the place that I love, though it was like giving up heaven above.
We took off for California. We thought the streets would be paved with gold when we got here. Some of us slept on the car, some in the car, some under the car, out along the road on the way. It looked like a huge can of worms coming down the street because there's an old car with 9 people in it. It was quite a trip out.
My sisters and brothers, they hated so bad to see me go west like someone gone mad. To leave all my loved ones and kiss them goodbye, just hoping I'd meet them in the sweet by and by.
Through that experience of coming across the land and the hard times, they became better people for that.
Most of America knew about the Okies. They became aware of Okies because the newspapers all over the country, the news on the radio all over America began to talk about these poor, desperate, white people in California.
There were signs around, no Okies. There was a sign in a Bakersfield theater that said, Okies and niggers upstairs.
From there they find work, and it really isn't bad, although it is different from the life they have had.
In 1930, the state of California is just 80 years old. The town of Bakersfield is at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, 100 miles east of Los Angeles. Every year, thousands of migrant workers come to the valley from Mexico to pick cotton, oranges, peaches, pears, tomatoes and apples. In between harvests, they drift away until they're needed again by the fruit farmers. More than 1,000 miles away to the east, there are other farmers, Midwesterners and Southwesterners, growing wheat and corn and raising cattle in the Great Plains of Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas and Missouri, land that their grandparents had claimed for themselves when they came out in covered wagons from the east. These farmers are not yet lumped together as poor Okies, but the Great Depression is already forcing down the value of their harvest, and the banks are threatening to repossess their farms. Over the next 10 years, a decade they will look back on as the dirty 30s. The rains won't come, the crops will fail, and the fields will dry out and blow away in the wind. They'll be left with only one option: to hit the trail again, not in covered wagons this time, but in jalopies and trucks. The new casual labourers setting off in their thousands for California. Migrants from the Dust Bowl, encouraged by the fruit farmers of the San Joaquin Valley, whose pamphlets and advertisements promise work for everybody in the cotton fields and orchards. They'll become the Okies.
Once again they headed west. Last year, in every summer month, 30,000 people left the Great Plains and hit the highways for the Pacific coast.
My name is Earl Stone. I was born in Wetumpka, Oklahoma. We lived along the Wewoka Creek, and I was 10 years old when we came to California.
The little home I had in Oklahoma, it was made of old automobile hoods, old lard cans, buckets, just anything, pasteboard, just anything that we could get to build one out of.
The Dust Bowl was coming from Kansas into the panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas, and out into Texas.
About 1933, I believe it was, there come what they call a red dust storm. It's come from the west. It done lots of damage to small buildings, blowed them completely away and tore the roofs off of the larger buildings. Some of them blowed the windows out of the houses, turned cars over and things like that, a straight wind. The next morning after the storm was over, the dust was a quarter of an inch thick all over everything in the house.
Well, I just come rolling over, and when it got near to the house, we was all afraid, and we ran into the storm house because we thought it was a storm. And we lit the lamp, and it was just so dark in there that we couldn't see one another. We just had, even with the lamp lit, and we just choked and smothered. And my husband was out after the cows. and he stumbled up against the barbed wire fence, and he followed the fence till he come to the house, is the way he was able to get to the house. And we had cattle. We had cows that we gave $60 and some $90 in pure old money. And it killed them. They was out in there. And we would cut their lungs open, and it looked just like a mud pack or something. It just really showed it was the mud.
My father sold what we had. We got a T-model come to California and a T-model Ford. Came the old Route 66, another route from Oklahoma that all the Dust Bowl people took.
Everybody kept telling us we better come to California. That's where all the work's at. My name is Reeford Hudson, and I was born in Tuttle, Oklahoma. My mom and dad, they sold everything we had. We had a milk cow, and my dad sold his horses. And we bummed a ride out here with another couple. They had a car, we didn't. The only thing we brought with us was my mom had a big cast iron skillet that she hid under the front seat of the car. And she had a picture, I had an older brother, of course he was married, and she had a picture of him. And that was the only two possessions we had, other than the clothes we had on our back.
Going down the road feeling bad, I'm going down the road feeling bad, I'm going down the road feeling bad, Lord, Lord, I ain't gonna be treated this way.
We were pulling a trailer a little box trailer, and solid wheel tires. We would go down these grades, and the car didn't have real good brakes. And my Uncle Sam was riding with us, and he would use the emergency brake, and when we get going down those hills and get going a little too fast, he would pull on the emergency brake to slow us down.
While traveling through the country and going over the mountains at Grand Island, Nebraska, our house trailer came unhooked from the Model A Ford, went over a mountainside and destroyed practically everything that we had except our Model A Ford.
I can remember, I didn't like to look over those edges either, when we were coming down, but I finally got kind of used to it. But I know my mother, it really bothered her. But we finally got through that, and we went through an inspection place. They wanted to inspect the brakes on this car. They didn't have it. So Harlan my brother, he just pulled up kind of slow, and got it stopped somehow. But they let us go on. And we went on to Sacramento, and we were parked there by the Capitol. And so they were going to come out and tell us to move. And my dad says, well, I don't have any license for this car. I can't move. They said, oh, just go on. So we went on. And my dad said, we could just camp right here. And they thought, oh, no, we don't want that.
She flows like she never flowed before, oh, Lord, and ain't gonna be treated this way.
Come to California, the pamphlets urged, pinned to fence posts and trees in their thousands. Workers needed immediately. High wages paid, 500 men required, work available. And from 2,000 feet up the Tehachapi Mountains, before the last descent into the San Joaquin Valley, the Okies might well have believed in the promised land, rich and fertile below them. Down at sea level, the reality was different.
The squatters' camps are located all over California. Let us see what a typical one is like. It is located on the banks of a river, near an irrigation ditch, or on a side road where a spring of water is available. From a distance, it looks like a city dump, and well it may, for the city dumps are the sources for the material of which it is built. You can see a litter of dirty rags and scrap iron, of houses built of weeds, of flattened cans or of paper. It is only on close approach that it can be seen that these are homes.
In 1936, John Steinbeck wrote a series of articles about the Dust Bowl migrants for the San Francisco News. He described the squalor which awaited the incomers, how their hope faded when they failed to get work, and how their dignity was gradually eroded. His accounts of their poverty were published together as Their Blood is Strong, and this book was read by a young academic in New York. Charles Todd decided to come out to California himself to report the plight of the Okies to an audience back on the East Coast.
Some of the people were a little shocked at some of the stories. For instance, the Okies, one of the favorite stories was what it was like to be in the Dust Bowl out in the Ozark and the valleys of the Southwest during a dust storm. I can remember some terrible accounts given by the Okies of cutting up a steer or a cow and finding that their lungs absolutely packed with dust and mud, and what it was like to move from one house to another during an intense dust storm. There were some very tragic and terrible tales. Woody Guthrie made quite a few songs about the dust storms.
I'm a Dust Bowl refugee, just a Dust Bowl refugee. From that Dust Bowl to the Peach Bowl, now that peach fuzz is a-killing me.
Music surprised Charles Todd. The hardship he expected, but the sound of singing intrigued him. And not just the popular songs of the time, but older, traditional tunes, out of place in the valleys of California. Todd taught at the City College of New York and lived in Greenwich Village, where he frequented a local night spot called the Village Vanguard. There he met musicians like Woody Guthrie and got to know another folklore enthusiast, Alan Lomax. Lomax worked at the Library of Congress in Washington and was planning a collection of the old ballads sung in the American Midwest. Todd, just back from California, was able to tell him that he'd been looking in the wrong place, that the songs were on the move again. By 1940, Lomax had persuaded the library to fund Todd on another trip to the San Joaquin Valley. Not with a pen and paper this time, but with the latest portable recording gear, which cut tracks onto glass and acetate discs and weighed 80 pounds.
Well, there they all were, crowded together in one camp, and these people came from the mountains and the Ozarks and the valleys and the hollers, as they call them. And they had not been in contact. None of them had television, of course, and none of them had, very few had radios. This place struck me as being an incredibly good place to pick up these things, because you had these big, nice recreation halls and you had people in. Every time we got together to do any recording, it became kind of a party.
By the time Charles Todd and his colleague Robert Sonkin embarked on their first recording trip in the summer of 1940, a network of government camps had been set up to house some of the migrant workers. This project, run by the Farm Security Administration, or FSA, was in its infancy 4 years earlier when Steinbeck was writing Their Blood is Strong.
The federal government, realizing that the miserable condition of the Californian migrant agricultural worker constitutes an immediate and vital problem, has set up 2 camps for the moving workers. The present camps at Arvin and at Marysville are set up on leased ground. The government provides places for tents. Permanent structures are simple, including washrooms, toilets and showers, an administration building, and a place where the people can entertain themselves. At Arvin Camp, water, toilet paper, and some medical supplies are provided. A resident manager is on the ground. Campers are received on the following simple conditions. 1. That the men are bona fide farm people and intend to work. 2. That they will help to maintain the cleanliness of the camp. And 3. That in lieu of rent, they will devote 2 hours a week towards the maintenance and improvement of the camp. The result has been more than could have been expected. From the first, the intent of the management has been to restore the dignity and the decency that had been kicked out of the migrants by their intolerable mode of life.
Todd and Sonkin travelled from camp to camp for 2 summers. They recorded not just music, but camp council meetings, interviews about coming to California, announcements, and court proceedings. And more than that, they captured on their brittle glass discs a glimpse of the American dream at its most fragile.
We landed here the 16th day of September, 1939. Some things haven't been so very pleasant, but on an average, it has been a nice place to live. After living here now for about 11 months, I call it the poor man's paradise.
It's pitiful the way we see some people come in here in the wintertime, have nothing, just sleep on the floors, just floor. And maybe if they had some of them that had a car, they'd get the cushions out of their cars and lay down on them. Because the tents would leak and the water would run in, so they'd get themselves off of the floor and try to keep dry in that way.
Whether you have money or no, you will always find a place to eat and sleep. We find various people here of different rearing, and some are educated, some uneducated, some are good and some are indifferent. But nevertheless, it teaches one a good lesson to try to get along with the various classes of people. It's a good experience. It's something that we all need. In fact, I believe the more we get of this, the better we will become, the better citizens. And when we get the better things of life, we will appreciate them more.
I think the realization that the American dream, as it had previously been conceived, might be flawed had been there since probably the late 20s.
Gerald Haslam, author of The Other California and Working Man Blues.
What this did, I think, was redefine the dream in some ways, in some very strange ways. The automatic riches of the West were no longer available. The West, a land of journey's ending, was no longer real. Suddenly, the West was a place where you came to work to earn success. And that changed in very dramatic ways the romantic illusions that some people bound to cities in the East and Midwest might have thought about the West. Westerners, of course, had known this truth all along.
The Wild West had run out, and all that remained back east was dust. The dreams of the Okies ended here, and the promises printed so boldly on pamphlets by the Californian fruit farmers were in tatters. But the Californians themselves, mostly Republican in their politics and well used to migrant and temporary workers, be they Mexican, Chinese or Okie, were perhaps slower to realize that this was going to be their problem too.
The right-wing powers thought at first that the Okies were God-sent. Here was an abundance of labor, and they still had the racist illusion that white labor was the best labor. Their blood is strong, as Steinbeck wrote. But ultimately, when the Okies began to, due to their misery and their desire to stay put, their desire to put down roots in some community, when they began to sour the sweetheart relationship between big agribusiness and big business and the small communities that ended up absorbing most of these migrants, suddenly they turned on them. And organizations were founded, the Committee of 60 in Kern County, the California Citizens Association. And most of those organizations were not spontaneous gatherings of outraged taxpayers. They were in fact sponsored by big business, by DeGiorgio Farms and the Bank of America and Chevron and people of that kind. So when they turned quite radically and tried to pass petitions about the state that would somehow, I don't know how they hope to effect this, eject these migrants from California.
There were people who had been small farmers, very independent and so forth, and they were, as they kept saying, were treated like a dirty dog. And, some of them were a little militant about it, and I can see why California farmers were a little frightened by the whole picture. It was a very, very exciting and terrifying thing to see these thousands of fruit pickers, they call them fruit tramps, with no work to do and pathetic wages and in very serious condition as far as nutrition went and food.
I'm sorry if we've aggravated this town of Farmerville down here, only a mile and a half away. I know in the cotton season people get their tickets cashed down there at Burgess store. I know this preschool right here behind me buys the groceries through the Burgess store. I know that Farmerville is getting dollar after dollar out of a $15,000 to $18,000 payroll that runs every month right here in this camp. That runs $180,000 from that to $300,000 in a year, and Farmerville is getting their share, and Farmerville didn't have to take the crack at you, and if they did take the crack at you, then the editor of the Visalia Times-Delta didn't have to take it up and comment on it on the editorial page.
They wanted to find reasons to toss the Okies out of California and send them back. And I think they did perpetrate some of the things that happened. Farmersville, I recall mostly about a Okie who was charged with running a kind of a bordello out there with women from the camps. And this was one of the charges, that there was a lot of sexual activity going on in these Okie camps, which is a lot of nonsense. Those people were too tired and too hungry for much of that sort of thing. But there was rumors of that, and I think that some of these rumors were perpetrated. There was a great desire to get rid of the Okies.
Now, this is the back of the old library. This is the old post office, but it was used as the manager's building in the Grapes of Wrath. And when we get up closer, our people are all here. Oh, and they didn't open the gate for us.
Doris Waddell organises reunions of the Okies in what remains of the original Arvin camp, where Charles Todd and Robert Sonkin began their recording trip, and which Steinbeck called the Weed Patch Camp.
What's your name?
Stone, Earl Stone.
Earl Stone. What year did you graduate, Earl?
29.
Oh,
In Arvin Elementary.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, is that the dance hall over here?
My name's W.C. Stamps. My family moved here in 1944 from Oklahoma, strictly out of necessity. Couldn't find work, and father couldn't provide for the family. They were 4 children and 2 adults. We came out, some of our relatives had come out a few months prior and told us what they had found here in the valley, here in the San Joaquin Valley, and that there was work, and that we could find a place that we could move in, such as it was with the cabins that we lived in.
Stamps. The name Stamps is familiar.
Yeah, that's
funny.
Of course, we lived, here. Never did live anywhere else until I was married in 1960. So we were here like 16 years. We lived in this camp, and
you were one of the lucky ones. See, we never could get in here. It was so we thought only the high class people lived here. You betcha.
Yeah. Well,
them tents and tin cabins were pretty good.
I'll tell you what, you rolled over against them in the summertime though, and it'd sure scorch you.
Oh yeah, and it freezes you to death in the winter.
That's right.
Hey. Because this would be a tin cabin that you lived in, and like say you had one electric light in the top of it that you had a string to turn your light on, and you wasn't allowed to have an extension or anything from it because there wasn't that much power coming through to all the cabins. And in the summertime, this being 10, well, it being 110 degrees outside, well, it was probably 125 inside. Okay, at night, you would just go out and you had an outside faucet for every 4th cabin, and you would wet a bed sheet. You'd wet it with water, and then you would wring it out, and you would use it for cover at night to stay cool, because you couldn't run a fan or anything because you didn't have the power to do so. And you opened the flaps, but that didn't help when it's 110 degrees outside. But it was a roof over your head, and it beat the tent that we lived in.
The camp was started in 1935. But the first manager was named Tom Collins, and he was a good manager. He was depicted in the Grapes of Wrath in the book. And after he left, the second manager was Arthur W. Siemens, who hired me as a clerk to rescue in families from the Dust Bowl. So when the families would arrive in their jalopies with their pots and pans, their bedrolls, their cotton sacks, their cooking utensils, mattresses. They cooked on stoves with kerosene. They had kerosene lamps. As I would register them in, it was $3 per month.
And the government camps that we lived in, largely while we were in California, the government has never spent $1 that's done people more good than these government camps. You know, I just don't think there's $1 spent nowhere.
My first camp was at Winters, California, and the camp there consists only of platforms for tents, and they're rowed in single rows, and a row on each side of the tents. And lawns are all green in between the tents, and at each platform they have 2 apricot trees, and it makes the camp very beautiful. And then north of the camp is a big row of walnut trees, and that sets off the camp from the road very nicely.
We had our own little domain here.
Right.
This
was our world. This is our world.
We had the store, we had the library,
we
had the post office, and if we went anywhere, we walked. So we had our own, more or less, little domain, and we had our own school. And eventually now, all the kids in the area, they wanted to come to Sunset. Right. You can't imagine what that school was.
This is Mary Campbell. This is Betty Campbell. We're from the Shasta Government Camp. We're going to sing the government camp song. It was written by my sister and I. Over in the government camp, that's where we get our government stamps. Over in that little rag house home. Over in Unit 1, there's where the people have their fun. Over in that little rag house home. Over in Unit 2, there's where the people don't wear any shoes. Over in that little rag house home.
We'll go out and try to see what the post office looks like here. And we get down these steps here if we don't hurt ourselves. They're kind of crickety. Been a long time since they've had any repair. This is this building here is one of the 10 buildings that we used to live in, and it had, you can see these windows. They had a rod that went through, and you could release these rods, and they would go down like that. You can see how the kind of action it has there. And that was our refrigeration unit in the summer, and we'd close them in the winter get our forced air heating going. I'm just making light of that a little bit since we didn't have such things. This, man, we can't get in, is the old post office, and this is where we used to come up, and everyone would get their mail at this one central location. It's we always considered Oklahoma that we came from as the old country in the United States of America. we still held it dear to our hearts, you know, even though we were here and didn't get to live there as we probably would like to. And for sure, my dad, he never wanted to be in California. You know, as much as the people in California didn't want him here, he didn't want to be here. But it was out of strict necessity to survive that he was here and lived here. And as long as I can remember, he was always going to go back to Oklahoma and live. That was his dream.
A lot of people never made it back to the Great Plains, to their real USA. But they adapted to their new situation and even managed to find pleasure in it. Sharon Reisner Garrison grew up in Arvin Camp.
I remember my father was a big prankster, and so people in the camp, they would play jokes on each other, you know, and humor was a lot. And you know, when someone pulls a joke on you, then they're your friend, you know. It was that kind of life. And they were always, my dad was always trying to find something funny for that, you know.
Just a closer walk with thee, bright and Jesus, if you please.
They would have church camp meetings, and sometimes they would last 3 days. And they would take their wagons down, and they would go out on a lake, and they would camp for 3 days, and they would have church. This is where you would get talking about brush arbor meetings. They would have trees, and they would just kind of top an edge off of the top of the log, and that was their benches. And they would just have church out in the woods, you know. And my dad, he said a lot of times the kids, they would, when it came the day to go home, well, they would get in somebody else's wagon and act like they were asleep, so that when they got home, Mom and Dad got home, they had the wrong kids. So they would all have to go back and get the right kids, you know.
I will never let thee go.
Maybe we made just as much fun of ourselves as other people did, but we understood it. You know, it's when people look at you with a sarcasm or down their nose at you, then that hurts. You know, then you want to kind of rear up, so to speak. But I'm sure there was a lot of Okie humor, a lot of it, and it got through some tough times. Whether there was not enough food, you needed gas, or you couldn't, you know, get to a job, or, you know, you had to rely on someone else to get by.
The strongest sense of tragedy in the recordings comes across in the lyrics of the ballads sung by the Okies, the songs that Charles Todd and Robert Sonkin had set out to collect in the first place. The hard times of others, from centuries before and from distant continents, were adapted and incorporated by the migrants to reflect their own experiences. They sang the defiant tales of resilient folk heroes as if they were telling their own lives. These were not museum pieces, but the living accounts of migrations from the past and the present.
Many of the folk songs, I've always felt, were actually pretty pure journalism. They go back to the 17th century in Britain when a tragedy took place up in Scotland or something, and many of these people were of Scotch ancestry, of course. And then there were the great outlaws like bold Jack Donahue. The Okies loved that sort of thing. It was anti-government. I went to one Saturday night program. It was full of lots of wonderful singing and fiddle playing and guitar playing. It seemed to me that practically every other Okie had a guitar or a mouth organ.
You know, I was out playing someplace and was told that my dad wanted me. I knew that these guys came in, and I was told that they were from Washington and that they were going to record these songs. And the best that I can remember, we were in one of those cabins when the recording was done. So they brought their equipment in. They didn't seem much of a setup. My dad, of course, would announce the songs and give a little talk about each song that we did.
Folks, this is the King family. So we have some instruments. Harlan playing the guitar, Charles playing the mandolin, Sid playing the violin.
We gathered around and just started playing. I don't remember seeing the equipment that they taped with.
It was terrible. It was a Presto recording machine, weighed about 48 pounds. Very hard to lug around. It looked like a big phonograph box. But it was a very awkward, heavy thing to lug around, and it was pretty primitive, according to what we know nowadays about how to record things.
Todd wasn't the only one making a record of the migrant experience in California. Photographers and journalists were telling the news to the rest of America, and one visitor to Arvin Camp would spread the story around the world.
In 1936, a car pulled up alongside the front gate, and alongside was a trailer house, small trailer house behind. The man came to the window and asked permission to come into the camp and interview families. He said his name was Steinbeck. So the manager asked me if I would go with him, and he introduced me to 2 or 3 of the families there, that he was busy. So I went with Steinbeck into the families, introduced him to one of the families in the first section, and he took notes as he went along. He didn't say what he was doing, so I didn't know that he was writing a book, but it was the Grapes of Wrath that he was writing at the time. He had a little typewriter in the back of his trailer.
It was late when Tom Joad drove along a country road looking for Weed Patch Camp. There were a few lights in the countryside. Only a sky glare behind showed the direction of Bakersfield. The truck jiggled slowly along, and hunting cats left the road ahead of it. At a crossroad, there was a little cluster of white wooden buildings. Ma was sleeping in the car, and Pa had been silent and withdrawn for a long time. Tom pulled across a few 100 yards, and then he stopped. A high wire fence faced the road, and a wide gated driveway turned in. A little way inside the gate, there was a small house with a light in the window. A watchman stood up from the porch and walked to the car. "Say, you got any room for us?" "Got one camp. How many of you?" Tom counted on his fingers. "Me and Pa and Ma, Al and Rosa Sharn, and Uncle John and Ruthie and Winfield. Them last is kids." "Well, I guess we can fix you." The watchman stepped on the running board. "Drive down the end of the line and turn right. You'll be in number 4 sanitary unit." "What's that?" "Toilets and showers and wash tubs." Ma demanded, "You got wash tubs? Running water?" "Sure." "Oh, praise God," said Ma.
He was very accurate about what was going on. His descriptions of the plight of the Okies were very true, and his descriptions of the tent camps and the conditions inside and outside and the nature of the Okies. Many of the people, when the movie came to California, when the movie Grapes of Wrath came, I think I ran into about 6 nice old ladies who assured me that they were the originals of Ma Joad. And I remember one fellow being pointed out to me as the original of Preacher Casey in the book. And I think Steinbeck really got a very accurate picture of the milieu and the plight of these people, but I think Steinbeck stretched things a little in his talk about the Okies and they're joining a great big union for 2, and a lot of union talk there that I never ran into at all. I didn't find the Okies in the least political at any point.
The Okies themselves may not have been particularly active politically, but the publishing of the Grapes of Wrath was certainly seen as a political act by many Californians, not least by the Associated Farmers, an organisation of large agribusinesses with political clout throughout the region.
This was a Republican state, and Frank Merriam was the governor, and he, like Herbert Hoover, did not believe in direct aid to people. We've heard this recently about trickle-down theory, you know, you help business and business will help the people. It definitely didn't work then, and people were dying, and that was, many people tried to dismiss that or ignore that or not see that it was happening, and that's where Steinbeck came in, because he saw it. He worked in the fields. He went out in the floods and lifted dead babies' bodies out of the mud, and this is why he was so passionate about the story that he had to tell. And of course, whoever read the book, whether some people on the Board of Supervisors did, definitely somebody in the Associated Farmers did, and they had a great deal of control. Needless to say, they contributed to the campaigns of everybody in political office in California, and the Board of Supervisors, and our legislators, and they didn't think that they looked too good in the Grapes of Wrath. And so they controlled the Board of Supervisors, and They told them to ban it, and they banned it.
The government camps were a threat to the large-scale agricultural concerns which had grown up in California. Bonanza farms, as they were known, had evolved as early as 1869, when the Transcontinental Railroad encouraged a wheat boom in California's Central Valley. Many of the large farms which flourished were controlled by businessmen in San Francisco and were dependent on increasing numbers of seasonal labourers. By 1936, these corporate agricultural businesses were the norm, and the Okies had taken over from the Chinese, Filipinos and the Mexicans as the main source of cheap labour. The Okies, though, didn't go away after the harvest like their predecessors, who had been dependent on accommodation provided by their employers for as long as the work was available. Thus, the Okies who stayed at the camps had much more control over their own affairs and were able to organise themselves how they chose, well away from the influence of their employers, a fact which did not escape the attention of John Steinbeck in Their Blood is Strong.
The people in the camp are encouraged to govern themselves, and they have responded with simple and workable democracy. The camp is divided into 4 units. Each unit, by direct election, is represented in a central governing committee, an entertainment committee, a maintenance committee, and a good neighbors committee. Each of these members is elected by a vote of his own unit, and is recallable by the same vote. The manager, of course, has right of veto, but he practically never finds it necessary to act contrary to the recommendations of the committee. The result of this responsible self-government has been remarkable. The inhabitants of the camp came here beaten, sullen, and destitute, but as their social sense was revived, they have settled down. The camp takes care of its own destitute, feeding and sheltering those who have nothing but their own poor stores. As experiments in natural and democratic self-government, these camps are unique in the United States.
And I'll tell you very confidentially, emphatically, that this council will not let anything hang in the air. And next Monday night, this council will probably take that, and we're not going to this office. We won't go to the FSA office here in Visalia. If we take it, we'll carry it to Washington, D.C.
The irony, of course, is that this vulnerable population was seen as materiel in the same way that John Steinbeck wrote about in one or another of his books. People came out and they said, we can organize these people, we can help them, and I think many of them really wanted to help them, but others saw them as fodder for the cause.
Yes, I would say that even my own stepfather believed in some of that it was all a communist plot, and that the so-called propaganda that had been sent out into the Ozarks about the availability of jobs and something, and so on, was something that the communists themselves had perpetrated. I have no idea whether any of that was true, but that was one of the big problems out there.
Well, I was too young to really understand a lot of that, but however, in Arvin, I remember that there was an organization started similar to the Boy Scouts, and so there's organizers came into the camp, and of course they drew the kids into meetings and so forth, and they called us the Red Caps. They gave us red caps to put on. Politics didn't mean much to me at that time, but I do know that then discussing with my brother and Harlan and my dad, they felt that these fellows were communist oriented.
They thought that the people were in such bad living quarters and things and hard life that they could win them over. And I know that they talked communism a lot, you know. Maybe camp manager or a camp assistant or whatever, working in the office there at Arvin. And they were planning these meetings in Bakersfield, the communists were. And they were talking about the Arvin camp, all the people there, that there's good prospects there.
There didn't seem to be, and of course, again, not being an adult, I was not exposed as much. But I know that there was a lot of talk and discussion amongst the grown-ups in the camp about communism. And there was arguments on both sides, back and forth. They say, well, you know, the communist that's just the common people.
I heard accusations of communism retrospectively in the 1950s for a couple of reasons. One is that the specter of communism was once again looming like a big iceberg out there in the Kern River, but also because there were people who were trying to justify earlier actions. And they would say, well, of course we had to discriminate. We could not have them living on the Kern River near us because they were communists. In fact, I know that there were some communist organizers, but they were a very, very small minority. Most people were far too desperate just to have any job at all to be worried about political theory.
Unlike the Mexicans and Filipinos, who had openly defied the power of the agribusinesses and pushed for unionization before the arrival of the Dust Bowl migrants, the Okies seldom showed much enthusiasm for organised labour or the formation of unions. They had mostly been independent farmers back home and remained individualistic in spirit in California. And anyway, it was a buyer's market. If somebody turned down work or threatened to strike, there were many others who would take the opportunity to feed their family. During one trip to a Mexican migrants camp outside the FSA system, Charles Todd recorded an interview with Jose Flores. He showed remarkably little resentment towards the Okies who had taken the jobs of striking Mexican workers.
Well, the Okies were put in before the Mexicans were put out because they were living in the groves. They had their trailers or tents in the groves. They were all ready to go in as soon as the Mexicans were thrown out. Their reaction against them, it wasn't so bad because they felt that the Okies are just a poor laboring class like ourselves. And at the time that they were brought in, they were promised good wages and they were promised that their wives would work at the ranches where the strike was on, and they were hungry and they didn't have enough money to keep up, so they thought, well, there was a good chance to make a little money and fill their stomachs up with food. So we didn't feel bad against them. We didn't have anything against them because, well, we just thought they were pushed in the same. As a laboring class, they were hungry and they were pushed in, same as we could have been pushed in into one of their own strikes probably. So we didn't feel bad against them.
Whatever the reality, it was big business who portrayed the Okies as communist and condemned the Grapes of Wrath as propaganda. Some ordinary Californian citizens may have shared those opinions, but generally their attitude towards the Okies was just that they were dirty and plain stupid. Together in the camps, the migrants were protected from these prejudices and could choose not to stray too far into town. The children who went to local schools, though, were more exposed to the taunts and preconceptions of the local children and some of their teachers.
My older sister, she was mistreated because she was an Okie kid from the camp. The teacher would not let her go to the restroom. And she said, I was forced to stay at my desk. And she said, I wound up wetting myself all over, you know, and then got in trouble for it. But I was one of those dirty little kids from the camp.
I was called out of the room, and the teacher came out, and the principal came and started talking to the teacher about that I would have to be removed from that class because they were making a special class for the pea pickers. And so she argued with him quite strongly that I wasn't a bad child and I wasn't having any trouble. And so he said, well, that's the rules, and we're going to have to put him in with all the other pea pickers. Anyhow, they took me from my class, and then all the other kids from that age group all the way up to the 8th grade, and put them all in one room. And so everybody's kind of angry about that, and we had some trouble in the classroom. There was some of the kids were as big as the teachers, and they, of course, when the teacher would turn around, especially after a rain in Calapat, you'd have mud daubers, and so everybody would pick up a little bit of mud, and when the teacher would turn their back, be splattered the blackboard with mud. So that was my first feeling of discrimination in regards to the Okies.
It took a while, But the kids at Weed Patch Camp did become accepted, and slowly in other parts of the San Joaquin Valley, things began to change too. Many of the Okies would have returned home to the Southwest and Midwest if they could, but they never got that option. They stayed in California and faced the suspicions and accusations of the Californians. As camps closed and prospects improved, things had to change. Slowly. The first-generation migrants gradually became integrated into Californian culture, not really becoming Californian themselves, but increasingly proud of being Okies.
The term Okie ceased to be a term of abuse probably about the time the second generation, the children of the migrants, began to graduate from universities, began to have their own businesses, began to become factors in California public life. At that point, many of them looked back and they turned the term around. It became a term of pride, and they began accusing people of calling themselves Okies who weren't, simply because with it came this sense of triumph, this sense of having overcome great hardship. So it's the second generation, I think, that has most altered that. Even today, there are many of the older migrants who are terribly offended when that term is used, no matter what the context.
I have a grower, and he had always thought, well, it was like, oh, those kids over at the camp, they're dirty. We were always so dirty and everything. We weren't. We just worked in the fields. And if you work outside, you're going to get dirty. Doesn't make you a dirty person. But we had that attached to us, and somewhat today people still do that. I don't know why.
There are many probably older Californians who still retain the old attitude towards the Okies. There are probably some younger Californians who have learned the term Okie as a kind of clandestine term of denigration. For example, a siphon hose used to steal gas is called an Okie credit card. When people didn't want to like country music, they called it Okie music. But it's a minority. It's no sort of mainstream thing. There's always a little festering at one end or the other when these things change.
The Valley today has a lot of Oklahoma in it. A lot of Arkansas and Texas and Missouri too. And not just cowboy boots, Stetsons and Midwestern accents, or the songs that Charles Todd and Robert Sonking recorded for the Library of Congress in the summers of 1940 and 41. A lot more was brought out from the Dust Bowl, along Route 66 and over the Tehachapi Mountains. These days you may not notice it in Bakersfield or any of the other small farming towns up and down the San Joaquin Valley. But it's there, beneath the surface. Whatever their influence on the life of modern California, the Okies are no longer outsiders.
I think the Okies have influenced modern California life. I wouldn't say to a great degree, but certainly to some degree. One of the lesser-known accomplishments of the Okie migration is that it has produced a number of wonderful writers. James D. Houston, Wilma McDaniel, Ken Kesey, Raymond Carver. And these people are the products of a society that had gotten past their insecurities in California, that had come in poor, worked desperately, but suddenly after World War II, confident of their own important role in the state and taking advantage of the educational system, it began to change themselves. They began to become more assertive, less apologetic about whatever it was they had brought with them. And out of that comes a new kind of writing, some new music, new kinds of politicians, people like Big Daddy Unruh, just a better, richer vision of what California can be.
If you scratch my surface and scratch my skin, underneath is the kid who came from Texas.
We were lucky to hit the time that we did, because the values we kind of acquired along the way.
I like to rest my heavy head tonight on a bed. The California stars, I like to lay my weary bones tonight on a bed. The California stars, I love to feel your hand touching mine and tell me why I must keep working on. Yes, I'll give my life to lay my head tonight on a bed of California stars.
We were much better than we gave ourselves credit for. And I think we're a whole lot better than a lot of people. We're not shallow. You know, there are people who think they're really great, and come to find out they're not. So I really think it did. It gave us a base to where we come from. We're grounded. We're grounded people.
In Voices from the Dust Bowl, the reader was Nathan Osgood. The program was presented by Billy Bragg and produced by Adam Fowler and Mark Rickards.